We are privileged to have with us an outstanding person today that most of us know from 2 or 3 years ago when she was running for U.S. Senate, correct?
Correct.
Deedra Abboud. She came to Arizona from Arkansas in 1998. She's a Phoenix-based attorney and the author of Campaign Chronicles about her running for office, as well as a featured author in the book Love Meets Life. She's the founder of the Global Institute of Solutions-Oriented Leadership, a solutions-oriented mindset consulting firm, and she's a highly respected for her community leadership and advocacy. Outstanding person once again. Deedra, you want to tell us about yourself and a little about immigration issues along the border? You were at one time an immigration attorney, correct?
Correct. I'm still an attorney. I'm just not taking immigration cases. So, a little bit about me. So I ran for U.S. Senate in 2017-18, and then I ran for Board of Supervisors here in Maricopa County in 2019-20. Didn't make either of those, but I was still busy running around and really enjoyed connecting with people and talking to people about the issues, which is the thing that I feel we need to do more of, both when we're running for office and when we're in office, because I firmly believe that if people understand where we're coming from, then even if they disagree with us, we can find common ground. They respect knowing where you stand. And that's how I ran all my campaigns. And while I was running both of my campaigns, and even before that, I have always recorded conversations, written conversations that I've had, because they give me something to reflect on and improve for myself. And while I was running for U.S. Senate, I had some that were just mind-blowing. So I shared them kind of out of frustration on Facebook. And people really seem to, I won't say enjoy them so much, but because the first ones I put online were protesters and really outlandish stuff. But I noticed that people really reacted a lot to that. And then there was a lot of conversations around it. And therefore, I felt like anything that creates conversation is a good thing. So then I started posting them regularly. This year, I compiled them all into just the ones from the U.S. Senate campaign. I compiled into a book called Campaign Chronicles, because that was the hashtag I used while I was posting them online, March 8th. It is on Amazon, both in an ebook as well as a hard copy book. And then it's also available for an autographed copy from Love Glasses Revolutions, loveglassesrevolution.com. Another book that I was part of last year was Love Meets Life. And Love Meets Life is basically 54 authors that wrote a story. And they're very diverse authors from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions, different sexual identities. All of it is in there. And it's just people telling a story with their perspective of love. So love showing up, for example, and how diverse love showing up can be. They're really, the Campaign Chronicles is a light read, because every conversation is on its own page, and some of them are really short. And it starts out each chapter with some tools for people to get better at conversations that are difficult. The Love Meets Life book is short stories, so it's also a light read. But both of them are very deep in the subject matters that they get into. I'm having a anti-bullying class. It's going to be in person and virtual. It's April 10th. It's 4 hours, because Tung Fu takes a long time. I mean, these can be 8-hour class is easy, and this still wouldn't cover every possible scenario. But, we wanted to give people an opportunity to get some of the skills. So it's April 10th from 12 to 4, both in person and online. And you can go to Soul, SOUL, Glow, GLO, wellbeing.com if you want to sign up for that class. Also, the Campaign Chronicles, we will be having a giveaway for the ebook on Amazon on the 8th and the 9th. It's a free download. So anybody can go to Amazon, look up the book, and download the book, the ebook file for free. So what we're going to talk about today is basically Biden. What is Biden doing about immigration? What's he putting forward? And it's a lot. First of all, we have to understand that there's so much to correct, and then so much to do better on. The biggest problem that is facing the Biden administration on immigration, besides a Senate that likes to filibuster everything, and also a lot of people who don't want to solve the immigration problem or even improve it. The biggest problem is backlog. And backlog is not just that we have a whole bunch of cases already in the system that are trying to work their way through, and there's just not enough immigration judges, and there's just not enough support, and there's just not enough time. They're scheduling for the last 4 years, by the way. They've been scheduling immigration cases like 4 years in advance. So these people are living in an unstable system for minimum 4 years before they can even find out the next stage of their immigration process. And that's a lot of uncertainty for people, especially for families. And I mean, for anybody, but I mean, families, you can't make family decisions if you don't even know where you're going to be together or separately in a long future that you have no control over. Another part of the backlog, though, is because things weren't done, people didn't get into systems. So there's a backlog even to get in the system, never mind the backlog if you're already in the system. We see that at the border because there were so many policies that were created that left people at the border or sent them back to the border to wait, as opposed to going through our normal processes, which is to process, see if you qualify for asylum, for example, and then give you a schedule. And then usually the asylum seekers that get through the first part of the process also get a work permit. So then they can work and support themselves financially while they're waiting to go through the system, which asylum minimum just to get to the second stage is 4 years. And the second stage isn't even the final stage. So that created a lot of backlog there at the border. And then we also had the detentions that happened within the United States, these mass detentions. And now you have a backlog of, where are the people? Where do they go? Families got separated. Where are their other family members? Are they still in detention, or did half of them get released? Where did they get released to? And then, what do we do with them? Like, how we can't just release everybody. We have to go through at least a minimum process of finding out who they are, what's their claim, what kind of action are they going to file? Is it family-based? Is it asylum? Or even work-based for that matter. There are a lot of different avenues that people can choose. So we have to minimum do that. And if you've got thousands of people that have just been, in these Walmarts that have been turned into detention centers, then it takes time to process that. And before we even get to the processes, we have to come up with processes, because we can't use the lack of process that we had before. So really, that is the number one problem of why we can't wave a magic wand and fix everything. It's backlog and the different types of backlog. So one of the things that Biden did very first, it was in I think January 28th, it was very early. He signed an executive order directed the Department of Justice to no longer renew private prison contracts. So basically he's saying we're not going to grow in the private prison industry on federal prisons. And so we're not going to renew those contracts. By law, you can't just negate the contract. It's a contract. You've two people, regardless of who and why, have made an agreement, and one of them is a business that is expecting to get paid for doing a service. So they can't negate the contracts if there's not anything legally wrong with the contracts. But what they've decided to do is not renew any contracts. So as contracts expire, they won't renew them, and that will diminish over time the number of private prisons. That only accounts for people convicted of federal crimes that are in private prisons. That doesn't address the detention centers who are not private prisons. They may be private detention centers, but that's an entirely different animal, requiring different legal mechanisms of how to address that. And I would suggest that you can't even address that until you figure out what your policies are for what immigrants are going to be housed in detention centers in the first place. For the past few decades, the Democratic Party has been pretty clear. They've had a pretty clear stance on immigration. Democrats, we favored a mix of enforcement like border security and deportation of undocumented immigrants who committed serious crimes, but not just everybody who's undocumented. And we also were pro-immigration laws that increase legal immigration and a pathway to citizenship for undocumented people. In recent years, though, a growing number of immigration advocates and progressive Democrats have become dissatisfied with that combination of mixing enforcement with pro-immigration laws. And the reason why that dissatisfaction exists is because the whole idea is we're compromising, and thereby compromising, we'll be able to come up with something that can pass and we can get done. But what we're finding is the Republicans continue to block bills that offer a pathway to citizenship, regardless of how much compromise that the Democrats are doing. And then there's also the policy among Republicans that they have to disagree and block everything that a Democratic president puts forward. I don't have to tell you this, but I mean, just because I like to point it out, Democrats voted, even though Democrats were in the minority and the president was Republican, Democrats still voted for legislation that Republicans put forward that would make the Republican president, look good. The Republicans, on the other hand, anything that would make a Democratic president look good, even if it's for the country, good for the country, they have a policy of opposing it. And so Democrats are becoming frustrated that as much as we compromise, we seem to be the only ones compromising, and even the compromise isn't working. Some activists have criticized Obama as the deporter in chief, but if you really look at what Obama did in deportations, which numbers-wise, he did a lot of deportations. I'm not going to deny that. But if you focus on what kinds of groups that he was deporting, he focused on recent arrivals and immigrants who committed serious crimes, which was something that the former president also said he was only going to focus on immigrants who had deportation of immigrants that had committed serious crimes. And then what we saw over the last 4 years is that everybody was subject to getting deportation, even if they had never committed a crime. Just there was no rhyme or reason to it. Nobody could feel safe or secure, and nobody could even figure out what they could do differently in order to remain. After taking office, Biden began putting the idea into action of going back to what are we really trying to accomplish here? Yes, we want a secure border, and yes, we want a humane immigration policy. One of the first things that he did was announce the 100-day halt on all deportations. But a judge blocked it. And by the way, in case you didn't know, the Arizona Attorney General also added Arizona, among other states, to a lawsuit to make sure that 100-day deportation halt was stopped by a judge. For immigration, there are no easy answers. It's complicated. I mean, and as an attorney, one of the most common things that we say when someone asks us a question is, it depends, because facts matter within what does the law say? It really depends on very fact-specific things sometimes. And in immigration, that's even more so. Even when, as an immigration attorney, people would come to me, I have a simple immigration case. And once I got into it, I would find it is not simple. There's all these things that make it complicated. In general, there are kind of three options of how to handle immigration. Number one is to prevent people from entering, as is now the case with many adults traveling alone. But that can create miserable conditions on Mexico's side of the border, because we're basically discriminating against single people and not letting them come over, and only letting people come over who are either have children or are children traveling without an adult. Number two is you can detain people in the U.S. while their legal cases are being considered, but detaining children is a bad idea, and Democrats hate that anyway. And many Democrats consider the jailing of any immigrants akin to Trumpism. Going after people who are already established here is also a problem, because these are our family, friends, and neighbors. I mean, these are not new arrivals that haven't established themselves in this country. So you're hurting families, but you're also hurting communities. Number three is to admit immigrants and order them to appear at future legal hearings, as is happening with many children and families. The adults most often wear ankle bracelets when basically they get paroled into the country. So they are released into the country and given a court date to come back at a later date, and then they have to wear ankle bracelets, which is fairly new in immigration, by the way, because immigration, out of all people who have quote unquote court cases coming up, immigrants are the most likely to attend. It's like in the 90%, like upper 90% of attendance, because people really do want their immigration status to move forward in the system, and understand that by not showing up, that's not going to happen. So mainly the people who don't show up either don't understand, it's so far away they didn't get another notice and forgot, or they seriously believe that it's not going to go forward, and so they're better off trying to go under the radar. But those are the rare ones. Even people who really believe they're going to be deported, really believe, like their attorney has told them, that they probably don't have a claim, almost all of them show up too, because you never know with the judge. Still, the process can take years and raises lots of thorny issues, again, about separating families, about hurting communities, about workers. Like, when we have, it's so funny when we have the raids on workplaces, and we're detaining people at these workplaces, and it's like, well, they were at work, they were working. Isn't that what we want? But that also hurts businesses, because on the one hand, you could argue that businesses shouldn't be hiring people who are undocumented, but on the other hand, you come in and you clear out everybody while you're trying to determine whether they're documented. The business is losing as well, and people are losing income while you're trying to determine, because we've had a lot of cases, especially in Arizona, where people are picked up and detained for several days while immigration is trying to decide whether or not they are documented, and several times have come up indeed that they are undocumented. We've even had some where they came up to be US citizens and yet they were detained for several days. In the end, the administration will still be left to decide who it's willing to deport, because in the end, deportation is going to continue. What has to be decided is who and how. And that's a wide net, a narrow net, but there's always a net. So the new proposals by Biden on refugees. Right now we always have admission caps for everything. It's not just one admission cap for immigrants across the board. There are immigration caps for different kinds of categories. And each category has its own cap. And then some things are subcategories. So they're under the major category cap. But for refugees, there are admission caps, and Biden has proposed raising the cap for the 21 fiscal year to 62,500 refugees. And then for 2022 fiscal year, which starts in October, he wants to raise the cap to 125,000. To put that in perspective, in 2016, the cap was 85,000. In 2017, it was 54,000, or not the cap, how many they let in. In 2017, it was 54,000. Trump lowered the caps in 2020 to only 18,000. So he put the cap at 18,000, but he only admitted 12,000 refugees. And that was the lowest that the United States has ever allowed to come in or have a cap for refugees since the creation of the refugee program in 1980. We have never not allowed so few people, or we've never allowed so few people, refugees, into the United States. A little bit about that, going back for the refugee status. So refugee status and asylum status are ultimately the same thing, but the status is different, and then the system is different. So for a refugee, they are in another country. They apply through a third-party agency, a non-government agency, for refugee status. They make their claim through that agency. That agency does the initial vetting and background checks, which include international background checks. Once the person gets through the first stage, and so the agency has determined, yes, you do fit the criteria for refugee status, then that agency, to make it simple, that agency contacts all the countries in the world that accept refugees and basically says, do you want this person? And then different countries decide whether or not they're willing to accept that person. And if the United States, for example, is willing to accept that person, possibly, now we're only in the possible. If the United States is willing to possibly take that person that has already been vetted by this third party agency, then the United States does their own vetting, their own background checks, their own reviewing of the file, and their own interviews of this person. And then that person, if they move through that system, they're still in another country. Then the United States, if they get through all of it, then they get refugee status, and then they get to travel to the United States. Asylum, on the other hand, asylum is when you either present yourself at the US border or you present yourself at a border check place. For example, fly in on an international flight and then say, oh my God, my life's in danger. If I go back to my previous country, I need your help. And then that's a different process. So the difference between the two is, number one, of where you're applying. Asylum is you're applying at a border of the US, including airports, or you're already in the country and you've been in the country a while, and then you have right now a year to file an asylum claim. A refugee has never entered the US and they're somewhere else, and they're working with an agency trying to get refugee status so they could potentially come to the US or another country. So Biden has proposed legislation, for example, for around border things. So he wants to restore and expand family case management programs. So this was a kind of a pilot program that was started under the Obama administration, and then the Trump administration closed it down. But basically what these care management programs do is they use community-based resources and services tailored to family needs, and then they use case managers to ensure that participants comply with their legal obligations as they're moved through the immigration proceedings. That includes they give them transportation if they need it to get to their hearings. They do logistic assistance to make sure if they need interpreters or disability assistance. They educate the person about their rights and their responsibilities as a person in the United States, because as much as people like to say only citizens have rights in the United States, that is not true. The Constitution does apply even to undocumented people and people on various, like basically if you're on US soil, you have certain rights. If you are a citizen, you have more rights. But basic rights of justice are something that people who are not US citizens but on US soil do have those rights. So they educate them on their rights and responsibilities. And then if a person is going to be deported, then the case manager also plans for the safe repatriation if it's required. So it's not the way it's used to be done. And let me tell you how it used to be done, especially for everybody in South America. They literally would just pile people on buses in Phoenix, for example. They would just pile them on buses. They would drive down to the border and they would just open the door and put them on the other side of the border, even if they weren't Mexican. They did not do this, by the way, on the Canadian border. But you could be from Brazil and you could be dumped on the Mexican border. And this was, quite honestly, this predated Trump. It only got worse under Trump. So the case managers are also make sure that if someone is going to be deported, that they're going to be deported safely. We're going to get them back to not only their own country, but also as safely as possible, especially for people who are claiming, even if the case ultimately decided that we don't believe their story, we still want to make sure that when we take them back to that country, that we do it as safely as possible. We don't want to just dump people, just dump them. Like this is not helpful. A lot of times they don't have any IDs or money or clothes or cell phones or anything. So we want to connect them with people that they know on the ground in the country that we're taking them back to, so that they have a safety net in that way. And the case managers want to help people remain in their communities, whether it's remain in their communities here in the United States, while they're waiting for their case to be adjudicated or solved, judged, made a decision, or if they're going to go back to their original country, that there are connections to that community as well. Another thing that Biden has put forward is reducing immigration court backlogs, adding judges. This is, as an immigration attorney, we will tell you one of the hardest things for the entire immigration system is we just don't have enough judges to hear the cases. And that's why cases are spread out, 4 years in advance, because we don't have time. There's nowhere to fit them. Joe Biden has proposed expanding training for immigration judges. You should know that immigration judges are not like other judges. They are administrative law judges, specifically for immigration. It's an entirely different legal system. So the criteria for how immigration judges get the job is completely different than the way our court systems for criminal and civil court get their jobs. So training is actually something that they definitely could use more of, and not speaking ill of. There are many excellent immigration judges, but there are some that are questionable. And so training would be a good thing. Biden has proposed eliminating the 1-year deadline for filing asylum cases. I mentioned earlier that asylum seekers were on U.S. land when they ask basically for refugee status, but they're asking for asylum because they're on the land. So if someone's already here in the U.S., then they have 1 year to file a case asking for asylum. If they stay here longer than a year without filing the case, then they could lose any future right of ever applying for asylum. It's just gone. And we might think, well, why would someone wait that long? Well, a lot of times it could be because someone came here for work, like legally. They came with documentation, and while they were here, things started happening in their country that where they would no longer be safe. And let's say they've been here 2 years. Well, because they've been here 2 years, now they can't apply. So they have to go back to their original country and then come back and then apply. And, as long as they didn't die while they're in that other country, So Biden is wanting to eliminate the filing deadline and just concentrate on, can you prove that you deserve asylum or not? He has put forward providing funding to reduce asylum application backlogs. Right now, like I told you, your minimum for asylum is just without them even deciding on the criteria of your case, it takes 4 years. That's just the first step. That is not, it's like 4 years for each step. I mean, it can be a long time. And then that doesn't even include if you have to appeal, for example, because sometimes judges do get it wrong, or your case is denied, and because you didn't give them a document that you couldn't get, and then you got it, so now you need to appeal. So there's reasons why it's a long time at the beginning, but then on top of that, the appeals process can make it longer. I'm going to answer this question. Why do you think so many people are now coming to the U.S.? There's a myriad of reasons. First of all, I mean, people have always wanted to come to the U.S. because we tout ourselves as the free country where everything is possible if you put your mind to it. And not every country people feel that way. And so they really do think that the streets are paved with gold here. It's so funny. I talk to immigrants in other countries, and when you try to explain to them that coming here is not easy, and that the system's not easy, and that getting a job is not easy, just so that they understand that it's not easy. Like you can come, but understand that there are obstacles. They act like we're telling them that, like we're trying to keep all the gold streets to ourselves, and we're just trying to trick them into not coming to rob them of something. In South America, however, but pre-COVID, there were a lot of problems. I mean, everything from gang violence to drug cartels to corruption in governments to anti-LGBTQ. To women a lot of times basically had second-class citizenship in that they were not safe, and the authorities would not keep them safe. So then you have, kids who their parents have been incarcerated in the South American countries for political reasons or any reason, or been killed by a cartel or all of these things. And so the kids are coming without their parents. And then sometimes kids come without their parents because it's so bad. So they have to, everybody's looking at it as the shining light, the place where they could live peacefully if they just get here. So we've put that image out there, number one. And then number two, we are better than some other countries, so people want to come because it's, especially South America, we're the closest one. We're the closest stable country that they could have a process to get into. You could also argue that because we have a process, different countries have different processes, and at least what our process is, even if it's not fair sometimes. But there's a process. It's like going to the MVD. It may not be fun, but you know there's a process. In some countries, you go to the MVD and there's not a process. So, just going to, a lot of people are going to come, and they're going to continue to come here for that reason. And they do it every year. This is not new. This has been going on for decades, I'm telling you. But it only becomes news when immigration becomes the forefront of a political battle. But these waves happen every year. Biden has put forward for increased protections for U visa, T visa, and VAWA applicants. U visa is a visa to protect specifically people who have been the victims of violence or a violent crime, and they are cooperating with authorities to prosecute someone. They get a U visa. Undocumented people can get a U visa that way, so that they can stay in the country and have a form of legal status while they're cooperating with the prosecution of someone who has done something criminal. The VAWA visa is basically for domestic violence. So that's for any spouse that is being abused by their spouse. This one comes in a lot because you'd be surprised how many U.S. citizens are domestically violent to their non-U.S. citizen spouse, while making sure the non-U.S. citizen spouse is in fear of being deported if the U.S. citizen ever chose to make that happen. So these are all protection visas for people whose they're physically in the U.S. and their lives are in danger in some way. Biden also wants to raise the cap on the U visas from the current 10,000 to 30,000. These visas are really, really important for, especially for undocumented people, because it goes from everything from rape, domestic violence, being robbed on the street, and you're wanting victims to come forward. You're wanting them to feel that the authorities will protect them from the criminal. And if the person is more afraid of the authorities than the criminal, then the criminal gets to go stay free and hurt everybody. Annually, so we'll switch to family immigration. Let me see, I have another question. Are Title 42 people being treated fairly at the border, or is there a Haitian Black bias? There's basically a bias against everybody from South America. You look at so many immigration laws that have a bias against people anywhere south of the United States, and that even Puerto Rico, and they're U.S. citizens, but yes, they're definitely treated differently. And if you look at some of the laws, it's very clear who's excluded, why they're excluded, and then ultimately all decisions are initially made by the immigration agent. The immigration agent is like all powerful. Even if I go as a immigration attorney and I go with my client for an interview with an immigration agent, it's not like court. I don't get to say I object and I have evidence and any of that. It's almost as though they're doing me a favor by letting me be present as a witness. That is the role as an immigration attorney when you're at an agent interview with your client. So I have to be careful about agitating the agent. Really, attorneys are spending most of their time trying to document what's going on in case they need to appeal the agent. But to argue with the agent, the agent has all the power just to deny the case, and then you've got to figure out if to appeal it. And the agents absolutely have all the power. So if they are not well trained, if they have bias, it will show up before. Most don't even get before a judge. Most decisions are made by the agents. So family-based immigration, annually about 2/3 of the more than 1 million people who receive green cards are family-based. So 2/3 of all the 1 million people annually who receive a green card, it's because of family-based. But because no single country can account for more than 7% of all green cards issued annually, many applicants have to wait years, some more than 10 years, to start the process. So you put in an application and it just sits there until your time comes. An example of that, kind of sparse it out, like, so they like to call it chain migration, which is just so dehumanizing, but it's not really a chain because it has a very limited reach. Family-based immigration means that I, as a US citizen, I can sponsor my parents, I can sponsor my spouse, I can sponsor, if after my spouse becomes a US citizen, then he can sponsor his parents. But until he does, he can't. I can sponsor my children. I can sponsor adopted children. But even my children, only if they're under 23. Once they reach the age of 23, it's called aging out. And then I can still sponsor them, but they're not the first level. So the first level is my parents, my spouse, my kids. And then the second levels and third levels and fourth levels, that goes on to my brothers and sisters. But I can't go for my nieces. So like there's a very clear restriction on family-based immigration. And the ones that are not the priority, which is parents, spouse, kids under 23, though they don't count toward the caps. So it just goes through the process, which can still take years. But if you're not in the first priority, if your brothers and sisters, for example, or my children over the age of 23, it's like a 10-year wait. Like I put in the application, and that starts the clock. And it can be 10 years or even more, depending on what country that person's from. So it's going to be about 10 years because they're not first priority. Then it's going to be 10 years or more because each country can only account for 7%. I'll stop there and answer questions. I don't know Mexican law, so I can't answer the question of how many refugees, asylum seekers Mexico accepts each year. I don't know their process. I don't know their numbers. Could you describe an example of a very difficult trip to get here from Central America? There's actually been some documentaries from Central America. There's kids that get on these trains, and it's just beyond your imagination to look at the kids. I mean, kids, we're talking like less than 12 years old kids, and they're piled onto this train like a cartoon, the way they're like hanging on for dear life. A lot of problems happen because the United States under the previous president asked Mexico to help us not have as many people come to our borders asking for asylum. So the United States paid Mexico to create a border burden at the Mexico border south of us, like not our border, the next border of Mexico, to Central America. And trying to keep the people even from getting to Mexico to come and ask. And that created a lot of problems too. I mean, obviously you have a bunch of people hanging out outside, no shelter. There very little food, very little money, water. They're obviously going to be victims of crime. I mean, it's easy pickings, right? So it created a lot of problems. We just really saw what was going on the media when it would talk about what was going on at our border, but then that was like twice as much going on at the Central America Mexican border, because we paid Mexico to do us this favor of creating this secondary boundary that people then basically they had to pay coyotes to get them across the Mexican border into Mexico. And then they tried to come to the United States. It was very, very difficult. It was also extremely disheartening to see basically, I will call it the QAnon media, trying to say that people were actors and had cell phones. I mean, the only thing they had was cell phones, and any reasonable person should know by now, you could be homeless and be okay if you have a cell phone. You know, if you have a cell phone, people know you're okay. You can call a friend to get on their couch, but like a phone is more important than most utilities now. So the fact that they were saying that they had a cell phone, so they can't, and what does having a cell phone mean that you can't be a victim of crime? Like, oh, she couldn't be a domestic violence victim because she has a cell phone? Let's see. So some more, because there's a lot. Biden wants to eliminate the per country cap, the 7% cap that I was talking about, where each country cannot account for 7%, more than 7% of all the immigration or all the green cards. Biden wants to eliminate the cap. He wants to use the unused visa slots from previous years. We have visa slots from previous years that are unused, and like they expire and go away. So you make a cap, for example, of a certain group and say this group can only have 18,000 and you only use 10,000, and then you just throw away the other 8,000 rather than recycling them back into other categories where we need visas. He wants to allow immigrants with approved family-sponsored petitions to join family in the United States on a temporary basis while they wait for green cards to become available. So people who are, let's say someone comes here, or even me, I'm a US citizen, so I sponsor to have my spouse come. They have to wait a year or 2 years, even 3 years sometimes, before they even get the green card, and they have to get the green card before they can come, right? So Biden is suggesting that why don't we let people, like, put them through all the security checks and all of the basic things, and then let them come here and be with their family while we're completing the rest of the process. This especially has been really bad for people with green cards, because people with green cards can't sponsor anybody else. So you have a green card and you put in an application now for your spouse, but your spouse doesn't get to come until you become a US citizen. And so you're separated for a minimum of 4 years. He wants to allow spouses and children of employment-based visa holders to receive green cards without counting them against the annual cap. So basically he's saying if you're going to allow spouses and children to come, that shouldn't hurt the other caps. It should be a family reunification. It should be under family immigration, as opposed to keeping it in the work visa, for example, and hurting how many people could come here on a work visa. He wants to prioritize immigration graduates of U.S. universities with advanced STEM degrees. That is just a prioritize. I mean, they went to a U.S. university and they got the science, the STEM degree. It's just saying, well, let's give them priority. Like they've already been vetted. right? Because they had to be vetted to get their student visa in the first place. So the vetting process should be faster. Let's go ahead and prioritize them and get more people in here that can do those jobs. He wants to improve access to green cards for workers in lower wage sectors. He wants workers who've suffered serious labor violations and that are then cooperating with the worker protection agencies to be under the U visa, that protection visa that I talked about before. He wants to boost the number of employment-based green cards, which are capped at 140,000 people per year. So we can only allow 140,000 people per year to come here on a work visa. And so he wants to boost that number. All of the things that I've mentioned are ways to get rid of or clear the backlogs that I started everything with. The backlogs are the biggest problem. Everything I mentioned is really just to decrease the backlogs. I think I have a question.